Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in. Feathers, titans that shook the earth. Lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost. They are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistoric worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. The First Breath of Pangea. Picture Earth 300 million years ago. Not the Earth we know today, with familiar continents, oceans, and landscapes, but a restless, shifting planet in the middle of something extraordinary. The land was scattered, broken into separate continents drifting across vast oceans. North America stood alone. Africa, South America, and India floated in isolation. The world looked more like a jigsaw puzzle tossed carelessly onto blue water than the map we carry in our minds, but beneath that surface, something unstoppable was happening deep within Earth's mantle. Heat and pressure drove gigantic slabs of crust tectonic plates into motion. For millions of years, they drifted, collided, and tore apart. The pace was slow, almost imperceptible, just a few centimeters each year. And yet, with time, that steady crawl carried entire continents into one another. Every collision was violent. Mountains rose in a geological instant, towering ranges that would rival today's Himalayas. Coastlines shattered, volcanoes erupted, seas disappeared. The surface of the planet twisted under forces so immense that no human imagination could capture the true scale. And from this chaos, a singular outcome emerged, the greatest landmass Earth has ever known. A supercontinent so vast it connected nearly all of the planet's land in one body. Its name was Pangea, but here's the twist. Pangea wasn't the first. Earth has always been a restless artist, building and breaking supercontinents in cycles spanning hundreds of millions of years. Before Pangea, there had been Rodinia, Gondwana, even Columbia worlds long gone, their outlines preserved only in rocks and minerals. Yet Pangea feels different to us. Why? Because of its timing, Pangea came together at a pivotal turning point in life's story. This was the late Paleozoic era, a time when life was clawing back from near extinction. Amphibians had already stepped onto land, but reptiles hardier, better adapted to dry environments, were beginning to dominate. Vast forests of primitive conifers rose where swamps once reigned. Oxygen levels climbed, and with them came new opportunities. Evolution was hungry, daring, experimental. And now, all of it would play out on a single stage, one supercontinent, stretching from pole to pole. Imagine that. Deserts so massive they spanned entire regions, swallowing smaller ecosystems whole. Rivers so immense they connected worlds thousands of miles apart. Valleys of fertile soil where forests took hold, and jagged coastlines where life thrived in shallow seas. Pangea was a land of extremes, lush in places, deadly in others, yet unified in a way no land before it had been. But let's not romanticize its birth. The first breath of Pangea was violent beyond comprehension. When continents slammed together, the collisions didn't just rearrange geography, they obliterated it. The Appalachian Mountains in North America, born from Africa colliding with what is now the eastern United States. The Urals in Russia, a scar left from Europe slamming into Siberia. Each mountain range was a battle frozen in stone, proof of a time when land crashed into land with the force of titans. The violence reshaped ecosystems. Shallow seas that once teemed with life evaporated as landmasses sealed them off. Volcanoes blackened skies with ash. Earthquakes tore across new fault lines. Animals and plants adapted or died. Many species perished before they ever had a chance to flourish. And yet, in that crucible of chaos, life found opportunity. Reptiles, especially, thrived on the vast dry interiors of the new continent. Insects grew to massive sizes in oxygen-rich air. The foundations of future dynasties, Creatures that would rule the planet were being laid. Still, here's the haunting question. Was Pangea a paradise of opportunity, or a prison of limitation? On the one hand, the connected landmass allowed species to spread across enormous distances. A predator that evolved in one corner of Pangea could roam across thousands of miles, hunting in unfamiliar regions. Plants could colonize new territories with ease, carried by wind or water. The gene pool was vast, allowing evolution to run wild. But on the other hand, there was no escape. With no isolated continents to shield them, creatures everywhere faced the same predators, the same competitors, the same threats. Extinction, when it came, could sweep across the entire supercontinent without mercy. Diversity suffered because isolation, the spark of new adaptations, was rare. It was both a gift and a curse, a double-edged sword carved into the planet itself, and that's what makes Pangea's first breath so compelling. It wasn't just geography, it was destiny. It dictated who survived, who thrived, and who vanished. It created winners and losers on a scale the world had never seen. And it set the stage for the rise of something unimaginable, the age of the dinosaurs. But in this opening chapter of Pangea's story, long before the thunder lizards took their throne, we see Earth at its most raw. Land colliding with land, mountains erupting skyward, ecosystems born and obliterated in equal measure. It was chaos. It was destruction. It was creation. And yet, as violent as it was, this was only the beginning. The first breath of Pangea was not a sigh of relief, but a roar of power. The world was being remade. The rules of survival were rewritten. And life, fragile, resilient, ingenious life, was about to rise to the challenge. The supercontinent had taken its first breath. And with it, the stage was set for the greatest evolutionary drama the Earth has ever seen. Chapter 2. Fire beneath the supercontinent. And we look at maps today. The continents seem so solid, so immovable, as if they've always been there and always will be. But beneath that calm surface, Earth is alive. It breathes. It moves. And during the age of Pangea, that movement was fiery, chaotic, and terrifying. The birth of Pangea wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a hidden war beneath the crust, a war of fire. The furnace. Below, beneath the crust, lies the mantle, a vast, slow-moving sea of molten rock. It doesn't boil like water in a pot, but it flows, shifting in colossal convection currents over millions of years. Picture an ocean made of stone, its tides strong enough to carry entire continents. That's what drove North America, Africa, South America, Europe, and Asia into one another, welding them into Pangea. But once united, Pangea became a problem. Imagine placing a giant metal lid on a pot of soup. Steam builds, pressure rises, and eventually, something gives. Pangea was that lid. It covered nearly a third of Earth's surface. Underneath, heat began to accumulate. Magma pressed upward, cracking the crust, searching for release. And when it found it, the planet roared. Landscapes of fire. The surface of Pangea was anything but tranquil. Volcanoes erupted in chains stretching for hundreds of miles. Basalt floods poured out like oceans of molten rock, hardening into black plains. In some places, rivers of fire extended farther than the eye could see, swallowing forests, deserts, and valleys alike. Imagine standing there, the ground trembling under your feet. A dull roar growing louder, louder, until the earth splits open. Lava spews skyward, ash darkens the sun, and the air grows hot enough to scorch lungs. Animals flee in panic, but there's nowhere to run. Rivers boil. Forests ignite. For life, it was apocalypse. For Earth, it was business as usual. But here's the paradox: volcanoes weren't only destroyers. They were creators. The lava that swept away forests left behind rich soils, dense with minerals, where new plants could thrive. Ash that poisoned rivers also fertilized them once rains washed it into the soil. Fire cleared the stage for new beginnings. On Pangea, destruction and creation were two sides of the same coin. The Siberian traps, Earth's deadliest firestorm, and then came one of the darkest chapters in Earth's history, around 252 million years ago. In what is now Siberia, the planet unleashed a volcanic catastrophe beyond anything humans could imagine. Scientists call it the Siberian traps. The word traps comes from a Swedish term for stairs, describing the step-like basalt plateaus these eruptions left behind. But what those rocks don't reveal at first glance is the horror they caused. For nearly 1 million years, volcanoes erupted almost continuously. Lava flooded across an area the size of modern Europe. Carbon dioxide and methane poured into the atmosphere. Temperatures soared. The oceans turned acidic. Ash blotted out the sun, killing plants on land and algae in the seas, and then life collapsed. This was the Great Dying, the most catastrophic mass extinction in Earth's history. Over 90% of marine species vanished. Trilobites, which had survived multiple extinctions before, finally disappeared forever. On land, forests shriveled, insects dwindled, amphibians fell. Even the mighty reptiles that had just begun to thrive nearly perished. For a moment, Earth teetered on the brink of silence, but the fire beneath Pangea, as merciless as it was, did not extinguish life. It forced evolution to adapt, to innovate, to gamble with new forms. From the ashes, strange survivors emerged: hardier reptiles, coniferous plants, and eventually, the first ancestors of creatures that would dominate the Mesozoic, the dinosaurs. Without that fiery crucible, their rise might never have happened. Pangea's volcanic gift and curse. It's easy to think of fire as an enemy. But for Pangea, fire was also a gift. Volcanic eruptions released gases that, in the right balance, nourished the atmosphere. They recycled minerals from the deep earth to the surface. They created islands, reshaped coastlines, and opened new habitats. Life didn't just endure volcanic chaos, it depended on it. But here's the irony. The same volcanic heat that sustained Pangea would also end it. As heat built beneath the lid of the supercontinent, the crust began to weaken. Fault lines formed. Rifts opened. Eventually, those cracks would split Pangea apart into the continents we know today. In other words, Pangea carried its own destruction within it. The fire beneath it was a ticking clock, and yet, before that inevitable breakup, the flames gave rise to some of Earth's most dramatic landscapes. Imagine entire regions coated in thick black basalt. Imagine skies that alternated between blood-red sunsets and weeks of ash-filled gloom. Imagine deserts scorched by lava and reborn as fertile plains centuries later. This was the living paradox of Pangea, a land of death that also birthed new life, living in the shadow of fire now. Pause for a moment and think about what it meant for creatures to live through this. Picture a reptile, no bigger than a modern lizard. Its world trembles as a distant volcano rumbles. Days later, ash falls like snow, coating the land. Rivers run dark. The sun grows dim. Food becomes scarce. If it can't adapt, it dies. But if it finds a way eating new plants, scavenging where others fail, it may pass on its genes, giving rise to future survivors. This was the reality for millions of species. Survival wasn't about strength, it was about adaptability. And adaptability was forged in fire. It's no wonder that the age following the Great Dying saw the rise of reptiles, creatures built to withstand heat, drought, and scarcity. They were the children of Pangea's flames, echoes of fire today, even now, millions of years later. The fingerprints of Pangea's fire remain. The Appalachian Mountains of North America, the Urals of Russia, the remnants of the central Pangean Mountains, all are scars of tectonic collisions fueled by magma. The vast basalt plains of India's Deccan Traps and the Siberian Traps still whisper of lava floods that once smothered the land. And deep within Earth, the mantle still churns. Plates still drift. Volcanoes still erupt. The same forces that built and broke Pangea are alive beneath our feet. It's a reminder that supercontinents may come and go. But fire never leaves the story. Pangea's birth was violent, but its life was volcanic. Fire shaped its landscapes, ended worlds, and created the conditions for new ones to rise. It nearly destroyed all life, and yet it laid the foundation for one of Earth's most extraordinary eras. Because without fire, there would be no dinosaurs. And without fire, Pangea might never have broken apart, reshaping the world into the continents we know today. Beneath the supercontinent, Earth's furnace burned, and in its flames, destiny was written. Chapter 3: Rivers that spanned a world. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the longest river you know. Maybe the Nile, stretching over 4,000 miles through Africa. Maybe the Amazon, winding through the heart of South America. These are giants by today's standards, lifelines that sustain millions of species. But during the time of Pangea, rivers dwarfed them. They were not just lifelines, they were world-spanning arteries. They flowed across landscapes so vast that their waters connected entire ecosystems from one end of the supercontinent to the other. They were the veins of Pangea, and their story is as breathtaking as it is forgotten. The endless flow when all of Earth's land was fused into one. Rainfall didn't follow modern boundaries. Storms that built in coastal regions could unleash torrents that traveled for weeks, even months, across plains, deserts, and valleys before finally reaching an ocean thousands of miles away. Imagine standing at the edge of a river in central Pangea. The horizon stretches endlessly, and still the river runs on. Its banks are wide, lush, and alive with vegetation, but its scale is overwhelming. You could walk for days along its course without ever reaching its mouth. It might take years for its waters to travel from the mountains, where they began, to the sea where they ended. These weren't just rivers. They were super rivers, colossal highways of water, unbroken by the oceans that divide us today. Web of life: where there is water, there is life. Along the banks of these rivers, ecosystems flourished. Dense forests of ferns, cycads, and towering conifers shaded the floodplains. Early reptiles basked on sandbars, while amphibians hunted in the shallows. Insects the size of birds buzzed over wetlands, feeding on lush greenery and each other. But the rivers weren't just oases, they were bridges. Animals could migrate along them, spreading across regions that today are split by oceans. A reptile evolving in what is now South America could, over generations, follow river valleys and end up in Africa or Asia. Genetic mixing accelerated. Evolution had a continent-wide playground. The rivers tied Pangea's ecosystems together in ways impossible today. They made Earth's life more connected, more fluid, more experimental. The great central river scientists believe some of these rivers may have stretched across thousands of miles. One of the most famous examples is the Central Pangean Mountains, a vast chain that cut through the heart of the supercontinent. Rainfall here created rivers that poured down both east and west, feeding immense drainage systems. On the eastern side, rivers may have flowed across regions that would one day split into Africa and Europe. On the western side, they poured across what would become the Americas. The sheer scale boggles the mind. Drainage basins, larger than any modern watershed. Rivers weaving together in networks that seem almost unimaginable. Picture it. A storm unleashes its fury in mountains near the equator. The water begins its descent, carving valleys, merging with tributaries, and eventually forming a mighty current that snakes across half a continent. By the time it reaches the sea, it has traveled farther than the Nile and Amazon combined. And along every mile, life depended on it. Dangers of the floodplains, but rivers, as generous as they were, could be deadly. Seasonal floods could wipe out entire ecosystems in hours. Imagine an early reptile colony nesting along a quiet bank. Suddenly the skies darken, rain falls in sheets, and the calm trickle becomes a raging torrent. Nests are swept away, young are drowned, forests are flattened. For species to survive along Pangea's rivers, they had to be resilient, adaptable, and clever. Some reptiles laid eggs far from flood zones. Plants evolved deeper root systems to withstand torrents. Amphibians learned to retreat to higher ground, and predators took advantage of the chaos. Floodplains were ambush grounds, where creatures could feast on the disoriented and the drowned. The rivers gave, but they also took away. Highways of evolution, now consider this. Without these super rivers, the story of evolution might look very different. Today, oceans act as barriers. They keep species isolated, which is why kangaroos are only in Australia or lemurs only in Madagascar. But on Pangea, rivers allowed species to spread freely. There was no Atlantic to divide them, no Pacific to trap them. A single river valley could connect ecosystems thousands of miles apart. This meant competition was fiercer. Species spread into new territories, clashing with others. Some thrived, some vanished. Evolution accelerated in bursts. Driven by this constant mingling. It was in these river-fed plains that early Archosaurs, ancestors of crocodiles and dinosaurs, began to rise. Agile, adaptable, and opportunistic, they found in Pangea's waterways endless hunting grounds and fertile nesting sites. Without these rivers, perhaps the Archosaurs would have remained obscure. Instead, they became contenders for dominance. Echoes in today's world, you might wonder, how do we know these rivers existed? After all, Pangea broke apart hundreds of millions of years ago. The answer lies in the rocks. Fossilized riverbeds, long, winding deposits of sandstone and siltstone stretch across continents. Identical sediment patterns found in South America and Africa match perfectly, as though torn pages from the same book. These rocks tell of ancient rivers that once flowed unbroken across land, now separated by oceans. Coal deposits, formed from lush riverbank vegetation, appear in matching seams across distant continents. Fossilized plants, identical in structure, have been found in places that today are worlds apart. These clues are whispers of rivers that once tied Pangea together. And if you travel to the Amazon today, or the Congo, or the Mississippi, you see shadows of those ancient giants. Our modern rivers are echoes, smaller, divided, but still reminders of Pangea's watery highways. A world connected by water, the rivers of Pangea did more than carve valleys or nourish plants. They connected life in ways we can barely imagine. They were bridges of survival during droughts, highways of migration, and engines of evolution. They remind us that Earth is never static. Continents drift, climates change, rivers rise and vanish. What seems eternal today may be gone tomorrow. But in their time, the rivers of Pangea were eternal, timeless, flowing across the greatest landmass the Earth has ever known. For the creatures that lived then, water was destiny. And for us, these ancient rivers are a reminder of how profoundly connected life can be when the barriers of oceans are removed. The story of Pangea's rivers is a story of connection of ecosystems, tied together on a continental scale. But water wasn't the only force shaping life. The very air itself and the strange climates it carried would create a world unlike any we know. And that is the story of the next chapter. Chapter 4. Giants of the Interior. Deep in the heart of Pangea, far from the coasts where rivers fed and storms rolled in from the sea, lay a world that seemed endless. Vast, open interiors stretched further than the eye could see, land so immense that even the mightiest rivers dwindled into nothing, and rain clouds often failed to reach. This was the dry, beating heart of the supercontinent, a place of extremes where survival demanded not just strength, but size. Here, life took a gamble. And the result? Giants, the rule of the colossus. Why did Pangea's interior favor such colossal creatures? The answer is partly climate, partly geography, and partly opportunity. In these dry central lands, resources were scarce and widely spread apart. To survive, herbivores needed enormous digestive systems to break down tough, dry vegetation. Bigger bodies meant longer journeys without water, greater ability to store fat, and more resilience against predators. And predators, in turn, had no choice but to scale up as well. If prey grew larger, faster, harder to kill, then only the most powerful hunters could keep pace. This evolutionary arms race gave rise to some of the most jaw-dropping animals Earth has ever known. The plant eaters of the plains. Picture a herd of sauropods moving across the horizon. Their necks stretched higher than buildings, swaying like trees in the wind. Their tails cracked like whips. Each step thundered across the dusty ground. These were not just animals. They were ecosystems unto themselves, dotting the dry heartlands of Pangea. Their massive size allowed them to wander for days in search of food. Their long necks reached conifer leaves untouched by smaller grazers. Their complex guts fermented dry, fibrous plants into energy. To see one sauropod was to see a living engine built to endure scarcity. Now, imagine hundreds of them, an entire herd stretching for miles. When they moved, the land itself seemed to shift, but sauropods weren't the only giants. Other herbivores, strange beaked reptiles, armored beasts with plates and spikes, and early mammal-like creatures thrived here, each adapting in their own way. Together, they turned Pangea's interior into a theater of survival, where size wasn't just an advantage. It was a necessity. Predators without limits, but where there are giants, there must be hunters. And the predators of Pangea were just as terrifying. Cosaurs, ancestors of crocodiles and dinosaurs ruled these dry plains. Some grew as long as buses, sprinting across cracked earth in pursuit of prey. Their teeth were designed not for killing instantly, but for tearing, clamping, and wearing down their victims until exhaustion brought them down. Imagine the terror of a sauropod herd sensing danger. Dust kicks up as predators circle. The air fills with bellows and screams. The largest individuals form a wall of tails and legs, protecting the young. For hours, predators probe, feint, and test. Only when the herd weakens, only when a single mistake is made, do they launch their attack. The scale of these battles was beyond anything modern savannas can show us. A lion takes down a zebra. A wolf hunts a deer. But here, entire ecosystems clashed when predator met prey, shaping evolution itself. Plants that became giants too. Wasn't only the animals that grew enormous. Plants too adapted to the harsh interior. Towering conifers, their trunks as thick as ancient columns, rose above the plains. Ferns blanketed the understory. Cycads and seed ferns, strange to modern eyes, dominated the landscape. Some of these plants developed extraordinary survival tricks, deep roots to reach underground water, waxy leaves to trap moisture, seeds designed to endure long droughts before finally sprouting when rain arrived. Together, they built forests that provided shade, food, and oxygen to the giants that roamed beneath. These forests weren't lush like today's jungles. They were rugged, sparse, adapted to survive in a land that knew little mercy. A world of extremes. Life in Pangea's interior was a balancing act. For every opportunity, there was a danger. For every adaptation, there was a risk. Travel too far from water, and even the largest sauropod could collapse from thirst. Grow too small, and you risked being trampled or starved out. Grow too large, and your body demanded more food than the land could sometimes provide. This tension shaped not only the creatures themselves, but the very way ecosystems functioned. Giants ruled, but they ruled in a fragile, precarious balance. Fossil echoes of a lost interior. How do we know about this colossal drama? The rocks of central Pangea, now scattered across modern continents, tell the tale. Fossil bones of sauropods the length of multiple school buses. Footprints preserved in ancient mud, some as wide as bathtubs. petrified forests where trunks lie in neat rows, marking the path of storms long past, and in these rocks are signs of adaptation written in bone. Gigantic rib cages built to hold vast lungs, teeth worn down by tough plants, predators with jaws designed for gripping prey larger than themselves. Each fossil whispers the same truth. In the heart of Pangea, life grew colossal because it had to. Giants as survivors, giants as victims. But here's the twist. Being giant didn't guarantee safety. In fact, it sometimes spelled doom. When droughts swept across the interior, small, nimble animals could burrow, hide, and wait it out. Giants, however, needed constant food and water. If those vanished, so did they. And so, time and again, the giants of Pangea rose, flourished, and fell. Each new drought tested them. Each shift in climate reshaped the balance. Giants were both rulers and victims, kings and prisoners of their own immense size, the legacy of the giants today. When we marvel at the bones of dinosaurs in museums, when we gasp at the sheer size of sauropods, we are really looking at the echoes of Pangea's interior. These giants weren't just big for the sake of it. They were the products of a world where survival demanded, pushing the limits of life itself, in their footsteps. We see the power of evolution under pressure. In their bones, we see the cost of living large in a harsh world. And in their story, we glimpse the raw, untamed heart of Pangea. The giants remind us that Earth has always been a world of extremes. And when the rules of survival are rewritten by climate, geography, and opportunity, life answers in the only way it knows how, by evolving into something extraordinary. And yet, if giants ruled the dry interiors, they weren't alone. Shadows lurked. Hunters without borders, predators unchained by oceans, thrived in this world where prey had nowhere to hide. Chapter 5. Predators without borders. Predators are defined by boundaries today. Wolves stalk the forests of the north. Lions rule the African savannas. Jaguars prowl the jungles of South America. Each reign is held in check by oceans, mountains, or climate. Prey can flee to other regions, evolve in isolation, and find refuge beyond the hunter's reach. But in the age of Pangea, there were no such limits. One land, one stage, one endless battlefield. Here, predators were not bound by borders. They spread wherever their prey wandered, from pole to pole, from the coastlines to the dry interiors. They were the original global hunters, creatures forged by a world where escape was nearly impossible. The predator's playground. Imagine being a herbivore in this supercontinent. There are no oceans to cross, no distant continents offering safety. If predators evolve in one corner of Pangea, they can follow rivers, valleys, and plains across the entire landmass. The result? Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Predators on Pangea enjoyed a scale of dominance unmatched in Earth's history. Their territory wasn't regional, it was continental. An evolutionary breakthrough in one species could quickly spread across ecosystems, rewriting the rules of survival everywhere. The rise of the archosaurs. Rulers of this boundless domain were the archosaurs, a diverse group that included the ancestors of dinosaurs, crocodiles, and even birds. Long before the age of tyrannosaurs and raptors, these early hunters were already perfecting the art of predation. Some sprinted across plains, lean and fast, like reptilian cheetahs. Others lurked in rivers and lakes, ambush predators with jaws built for bone-crushing force. Some even experimented with bipedal stance, freeing their forelimbs for grasping, slashing, and seizing prey. Every adaptation sharpened by evolution could spread unhindered. A predator that mastered ambush in one region could carry that strategy across an entire supercontinent. Terror on the plains. Picture this: a herd of massive herbivores trudges across a sun-baked plain. They are cautious, heads swinging side to side, tails swaying as defenses. But then, from the dust, shadows emerge. Dozens of predators fan out, circling, cutting off escape routes. On today's continents, prey often escape into forests, rivers, or neighboring regions. But here, there's only open land stretching to the horizon. Nowhere safe. Nowhere beyond the hunter's reach. Predators attack not just as individuals, but sometimes as opportunists working in loose groups. One drove the herd. Another struck from the side. The chase could last for hours, until exhaustion tipped the scales. The land itself offered no mercy. Giants. Among hunters, not all predators relied on speed or cunning. Some relied on sheer size. Archosaurian giants, some longer than buses, roamed these lands, jaws packed with serrated teeth like knives. Their presence alone shifted ecosystems. Herbivores were forced into constant vigilance. Even the largest sauropods could fall to a determined pack of hunters. The interior of Pangea became a place where every watering hole, every open plain, carried risk. And the most terrifying part? These predators didn't have to stop at natural boundaries. If prey moved, they followed. If ecosystems shifted, they adapted. They were predators in the truest sense, unbound, relentless. Everywhere. Evolution on a global scale, this predator-prey arms race wasn't just a struggle for survival, it was an engine for evolution. Prey species had no option but to adapt quickly. Armor developed. Thick plates, spikes, and clubs. Herding behaviors evolved, where safety lay in numbers. Some species grew to titanic sizes, simply to make themselves too costly for predators to attack. But every adaptation sparked a counter. Predators grew larger, stronger, and smarter. Teeth evolved to pierce armor. Claws curved sharper to grip hides. Hunting tactics diversified: ambush, chase, endurance. Deception. It was evolution in high gear, driven by the pressure of predators that knew no borders. Fossils that whisper of the hunt, the evidence of this arms. Races still buried in the rocks. Fossilized bones of prey scarred with tooth marks. Entire skeletons preserved mid-battle, predator and prey locked together for eternity. In some sites, trackways show predator footprints converging on herds, the dance of hunt and escape preserved in stone. In others, skeletons of massive hunters lie alongside prey, suggesting battles so fierce that neither survived. These fossils are time capsules of terror moments frozen in rock that remind us just how relentless survival on Pangea truly was. The endless pressure of fear. Imagine living in such a world. Every step, every sip of water, every grazing session was a gamble. Fear was constant. Prey never had the luxury of lowering their guard. This stress shaped not only their bodies, but their behavior. Herbivores clustered in massive herds, not just for companionship but for survival. Young were raised under constant watch. Migration became a necessity, moving endlessly to outrun predators that followed like shadows. For predators, the endless pressure bred resilience, cunning, and specialization. They became hunters not of regions, but of an entire planet's worth of prey. The predator's legacy, when we look at modern predators, lions, tigers, wolves, we see echoes of Pangea. But compared to their ancient ancestors, they are regional kings, limited in reach. On Pangea, the kings of the hunt ruled without borders, stretching their dominance across thousands of miles. Their legacy is written in the very success of their descendants. Dinosaurs would one day inherit this predator's mantle, spreading across the earth and reshaping ecosystems for millions of years. Birds, the only surviving lineage of these archosaurs, still carry the sharp eyes, the coordinated hunting instincts, and the predatory heritage forged on the supercontinent. Predators without borders defined in age. They shaped the prey, the landscapes, and the very rhythm of life. Their shadow still lingers in every claw, every hunting cry, every chase that echoes in today's natural world. But even predators needed a stage. And in the vast interior of Pangea, beyond the rivers and herds, another world stretched out, an ocean made not of water, but of sand. A desert so immense it rivaled seas in size, with its own bizarre ecosystems and hidden dramas. Chapter 6. The desert oceans. Close your eyes and imagine an ocean. Waves rolling. Depths teeming with life. But now replace the water with sand. Replace fish with reptiles, insects, and hardy plants. Replace currents with winds that sweep dunes like tides. This was the paradox of Pangea. Deserts so vast and deep that they behaved like seas, complete with their own marine ecosystems. Pangea's heart wasn't lush. It was brutal. The further you went from the coastlines, the more water disappeared, until you were standing in what scientists now call the central Pangean desert, possibly the largest desert Earth has ever known. Imagine today's Sahara. Now triple it, and then stretch it unbroken across thousands of kilometers. That was the desert ocean of Pangea. An ocean without why call it an ocean? Because it moved, flowed, and consumed with the same relentlessness as the sea. Dunes towered like waves frozen mid-crest, only to shift again with each gust. Sandstorms swept across horizons like storms rolling over open water. Travelers, if there had been any, would feel as if they were crossing a living, breathing sea of sand. But even in this merciless world, life adapted. And where there is life, there are stories of survival so bizarre, they rival the strangest creatures of the real oceans, the masters of the sand. The plankton of this desert ocean were plants. Tiny, hardy ferns and scrubby conifers clung to rare patches of soil, waiting months, sometimes years, for rain. Their seeds spread far and wide, like drifting spores on ocean currents. They were the invisible base of the food chain. Above them came the fish, small reptiles, and amphibians that could burrow quickly or race across dunes before predators spotted them. Some had long limbs like fins, evolved not for swimming, but for running on unstable ground. Their movements mirrored the darting of fish beneath waves. Then came the sharks, predators that ruled these sands the way great whites dominate seas. Picture Erythrosochus, a monstrous reptile with a massive head and crushing jaws. It wasn't built for long chases. It was the ambush master, the lurking shadow beneath the dunes. To smaller animals, the desert floor itself was alive with killers, islands in a sea of sand like real oceans. The desert had islands. These were oases, rare pools, and green pockets where life gathered in desperate clusters. Around them, ecosystems flourished like coral reefs. Herds of early dinosaurs, prosauropods, and ornithischians staggered toward these sanctuaries, knowing predators waited. Waterholes were battlefields. To drink was to risk your life, and just as islands and seas can isolate species, these oases may have nurtured unique evolutionary experiments, plants or reptiles, that never spread far but thrived in their isolated patches. For paleontologists, they are ghost worlds, hinted at in scattered fossils. The winds as currents. Desert winds acted like ocean currents, transporting seeds, insects, even small animals across unimaginable distances. They carved dune systems that behaved like tidal flows, erasing tracks within hours, leaving only fleeting signs of life. For prey, this was a curse. You couldn't rely on scent or tracks to follow the herd. For predators, it was a challenge, every hunt reset by the wind, but the desert also preserved. Skeletons left in the open dried, bleached and sank beneath sands, sometimes perfectly fossilized. To us today, these bones are like shipwrecks at the bottom of the sea, frozen stories of lives swallowed by the desert ocean. Giants on the move, and yet, the desert was not empty. It was crossed by titans. Early sauropodomorphs, ancestors of the long-necked giants, marched across dunes in herds. Their size gave them endurance, their long necks let them browse what little scrub existed, and their migrations turned them into caravans of survival. To predators, these herds were moving islands of flesh, oases of meat. Packs of smaller hunters like Coelophysis followed, darting at stragglers the way reef sharks nip at schools of fish. For days, even weeks, the dunes became theaters of chase, kill, and flight. Imagine standing at a dune ridge. In the distance, a thunder of footsteps shakes the sand as dozens of long-necked dinosaurs trudge forward, shadows stretching under the red Pangean sun. Behind them, streaks of movement, predators, tireless, waiting for weakness. Overhead, the sky darkens with dust. This wasn't emptiness. It was drama on a planetary scale. Sandstorms, the desert's tempests, and then the storms came. Sandstorms so violent they could strip flesh, bury herds alive, and reshape entire landscapes in hours. To small creatures, these storms were extinction events. To larger ones, they were brutal trials of endurance. Yet storms also brought life. Lightning strikes sparked fires that opened seeds. Heavy downpours, rare as miracles, turned dunes into temporary wetlands. For a few days, deserts bloomed. Insects swarmed and animals feasted. Then, just as suddenly, the water vanished, and the ocean of sand reclaimed its silence. The hidden survivors, but the true masters of these desert oceans, weren't the giants or the killers. They were the burrowers. Small reptiles, amphibians, and insect analogues dug deep into sand to escape the heat and wait out the storms. In their underground tunnels, they formed entire hidden ecosystems, like undersea caves beneath the waves. These creatures may have been the ancestors of lineages that outlasted even the largest dinosaurs. In the harshest seas of sand, survival belonged to the hidden, not the mighty. Why it mattered the desert oceans of Pangea weren't just curiosities. They shaped evolution itself. They forced animals to adapt to extremes, to migrate, to endure, to innovate. They became the testing ground for resilience, and they left behind a paradox. To us today, deserts feel empty, lifeless. But on Pangea, these deserts were oceans, pulsing with hidden life, ruthless predators, desperate migrations, and the eternal gamble of survival. Closing image picture, a twilight horizon. The last rays of the sun blaze red across endless dunes. Shadows of dinosaurs stretch long as they march, their footprints already swallowed by wind. Above, the stars emerge, silent witnesses to an ocean without water. This was Pangea's heart, the greatest desert Earth ever knew, alive with the whispers of its strange, shifting sea. Chapter 7. Secrets of the Tethys Shoreline. If Pangea's heart was a desert ocean, then its edges were something altogether different, a paradise. A frontier, a place where life thrived in dazzling diversity. This was the Tethys Shoreline, a belt of coastlines hugging the vast Tethys Ocean. While the central Pangean desert suffocated in dryness, the Tethys was a sanctuary. Warm, shallow waters lapped against fertile coasts. Mangrove-like forests flourished in estuaries, and coral reefs stretched like underwater cities. Here, survival was not just possible, it was abundant. The ocean that divided and connected, the Tethys Ocean, wasn't just a body of water. It was the lifeline of Pangea. Imagine a shimmering blue sea cutting across the eastern edge of the supercontinent, dividing what we now know as Africa, Asia, and Europe. To early reptiles and amphibians, this wasn't just a boundary, it was an opportunity. Shorelines became corridors of life. Species traveled along its coasts the way caravans move along highways, spreading into new habitats, encountering new rivals. For millions of years, the Tethys Shoreline was both barrier and bridge. Its waves kept inland deserts at bay, while its tides opened doors to ecosystems unmatched anywhere else on Earth. Reefs like living cities step into the shallow Tethys waters, and you'd see coral reefs exploding with life. Not the modern corals we know today, but strange, ancient reef builders, sponges, algae, and bizarre coralline creatures whose skeletons now lie fossilized in mountains. Around them darted fish armored in scales, sharks cruising like predators in alleyways, and ammonites, coiled-shelled cephalopods, spiraling through the water like living submarines above the surface. The reefs shaped coastlines, creating lagoons and tidal pools that trapped both food and danger. Small reptiles ventured into these pools, snapping at fish stranded by the tide, just as modern herons do. Every tide change was a feeding frenzy. Mangroves of the ancient world, where rivers met the Tethys, lush green deltas formed. Imagine something like today's mangroves, swampy forests where roots tangled in mud and fish darted between trunks. Amphibians flourished here, basking in the warm shallows. Insects buzzed in clouds above the water. Primitive crocodile-like reptiles lurked silently, ready to strike. These deltas were nurseries. Eggs could be hidden in soft mud, young could grow with relative safety, and food was everywhere. Evolution thrived in such conditions, pushing species to experiment, to grow tougher skins, sharper teeth, longer limbs. The Tethys shoreline was not only a paradise. It was a laboratory of adaptation, predators of two worlds, but paradise always has shadows. Along the Tethys coast lived some of the earliest marine reptiles, creatures that blurred the line between land and sea. Imagine a reptile shaped like a lizard, but swimming with the grace of a seal. Some would evolve into giants like the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, though in Pangea's early days, they were only just beginning their rule to small prey. The shoreline was dangerous from both directions. Predators could strike from land, swift reptiles leaping from behind rocks or from water, with jaws snapping from below the waves. Nowhere was truly safe. Fossil whispers of a lost world. How do we know about these ancient shores? Fossils. Today, in places like the Alps, the Himalayas, and the Mediterranean, rocks whisper of the Tethys. Mountain ranges that now scrape the sky were once seabeds. Fossils of ammonites, corals, and marine reptiles lie stranded in stone thousands of meters above sea level, evidence that entire oceans were swallowed. Their secrets locked in rock. It's strange to think that when you hike in the Alps or trek across the Middle East, you may be walking on the very floor of the Tethys ocean. Life on the edge. The shoreline wasn't just about water. It was about the dynamic clash of environments, desert meeting sea, forest meeting reef, river meeting tide. Each boundary created niches, and niches are where evolution does its finest work. Think of small reptiles learning to fish in tidal pools, or insects laying eggs in damp sands that flooded every high tide, or amphibians growing stronger lungs as they ventured further onto beaches. Each tiny experiment in survival nudged life toward new forms. Some would vanish, dead ends in the evolutionary maze. Others would ignite lineages that would rule for millions of years. A paradise with consequences. Tethys shoreline was a jewel, but it wasn't eternal. Over time, as Pangea began to fracture, the Tethys would widen, swallowing coasts, drowning forests, and scattering ecosystems. But in its prime, it was a world of abundance, perhaps one of the most vibrant ecosystems Earth has ever seen. Closing image picture. It, the red sun of Pangea sinking into the horizon. Waves of the Tethys glow golden. On the beach, reptilian tracks cross the wet sand, leading toward the forest. In the shallows, ammonites spiral beneath the waves, and a crocodile-like shadow slides silently between roots. Above, flocks of early pterosaurs screech as they dive for fish. This was the shoreline of the Tethys, a secret paradise. A cradle of life, and a reminder that even on a supercontinent of deserts and violence, edges could bloom with wonder. Chapter 8, Skylords of Pandy. When you imagine Pangea, it's easy to picture deserts, jungles, rivers, and oceans. But there was another frontier, one just as important, just as dangerous, and far harder to conquer, the sky. And in the skies above Pangea, new rulers were learning to master the winds. They were unlike anything Earth had seen before. Neither dinosaurs nor birds, not lizards nor bats. They were something entirely new. These were the pterosaurs, the first great vertebrates to claim the air as their kingdom. They were the Skylords of Pangea, the first to take flight long before birds ever flapped their wings. Before bats even existed, pterosaurs rose into the skies. Around 230 million years ago, they evolved from small reptiles scurrying along Pangea's shores. Through some astonishing evolutionary gamble, their hands stretched into wings, a single elongated finger supporting a vast, thin membrane of skin. Imagine the audacity of that transformation. A creature that once darted between rocks suddenly found itself soaring over oceans, forests, and deserts. For the first time, the skies were not just empty space. They were alive. At first, these pioneers of flight were small, no bigger than crows or gulls. But they quickly diversified. Some became fish hunters, skimming the waves of the Tethys. Others stalked inland deserts, diving on insects or small reptiles. With flight came freedom. And with freedom came dominance, a world viewed from above. To understand the power of Pangea's skylords, you need to picture the world from their perspective. From above, the vastness of Pangea stretched endlessly. Rivers cut across deserts like silver snakes. Herds of reptiles moved across plains like rippling shadows. Forest canopies looked like oceans of green. From this vantage point, a pterosaur could spot prey miles away. It could escape predators that lumbered helplessly below. It could migrate along coasts, using the wind as a highway to explore new territories. The sky gave them something no land-bound creature had: the ability to connect ecosystems. One coastline's fish could become another coastline's feast. One inland lake could be discovered by a scout, then raided by a whole colony. The pterosaurs weren't just survivors. They were explorers, tying the vastness of Pangea together from above. Diversity of the sky. Lords, what makes the story of pterosaurs so fascinating is their variety. The skies above Pangea weren't filled with one kind of flyer. They were a theater of many forms, each adapted for its own role. The small hunters, nimble, insect-snatching species with short wings built for quick turns. Darting through forest canopies like dragonflies. The fishers, long-snouted, sharp-toothed pterosaurs that skimmed over the Tethys, plunging into the water to snatch prey. Their beaks were precision tools, evolved for efficiency. The desert stalkers, long-legged flyers that prowled sandy inland seas. They weren't just flyers, they walked the ground like storks, using flight to leap between scarce waterholes. The giants, though the true colossi would evolve later. Pangea's skies already hosted species with wingspans of several meters. Imagine a shadow passing over a herd of dinosaurs, larger than any bird alive today. Each one carved out its niche. And together, they turned the air into an ecosystem as rich as any forest or reef. Predator and prey in the air. But flight didn't just mean hunting. It also meant escaping. Smaller reptiles and mammals looked upward with dread. Eggs hidden in nests were raided from above. Hatchlings became meals for wings that swooped silently out of the sky. Yet even pterosaurs had to fear. Larger ones bullied the smaller. On the ground, predators like coelophases could leap up and snap them mid-landing. Storms could dash them against cliffs or drown them in sudden downpours. To rule the skies didn't mean safety. It meant constant vigilance. Colonies of the cliffs, one of the most dramatic sights of Pangea's coastlines, would have been the pterosaur colonies. Imagine cliffs rising over the Tethys shoreline, white not with seabirds, but with leathery winged reptiles packed shoulder to shoulder. Their cries would echo across the water, a chorus of screeches, barks, and croaks. Eggs nestled in sand or cracks. Adults wheeled in vast numbers, their wings darkening the sky like clouds. Youngsters made their first clumsy flights, crashing into rocks or tumbling into the sea where predators waited. It was noisy, dangerous, chaotic, but also one of the greatest spectacles of life on Earth. And like modern seabird colonies, these cliffs were engines of evolution. Competition was fierce. The strongest flyers thrived. The weakest perished quickly. Every generation, wings grew stronger, bodies lighter, instincts sharper. The teethish shoreline was not just a paradise for fishers, it was a crucible, where the Sky Lords honed their dominance. Flight as revolution. Why does this matter? Because flight wasn't just another adaptation. It was a revolution. Pterosaurs rewrote the rules of survival. They could bypass deserts to reach oases others would never find. They could follow migrating herds from the air, swooping down to steal scraps. They could colonize islands no predator could reach. Flight gave them access to food sources, habitats, and strategies unavailable to any creature stuck on the ground. In doing so, they pushed evolution forward. Other animals had to adapt, to hide nests better, to migrate further, to develop defenses against raids from above. The rise of the Sky Lords didn't just change the skies. It reshaped the land and seas below them, a cinematic vision picture, a Pangean dawn. The desert still cool, the forest still cloaked in mist. Suddenly, shadows wheel across the sky, dozens of pterosaurs rising with the sun, their wings glowing orange in the light. Below, a herd of reptiles stirs uneasily, their eyes flicking upward. Along the shoreline, waves glitter as long-snouted hunters dive, spearing fish with precision. On a cliff face, 1,000 cries merge into a deafening roar as wings beat the air. This was Pangea's sky. Not empty, not silent. Alive with motion, noise, and the ever-present tension of predator and prey. Legacy of the Sky Lords. Though pterosaurs would eventually vanish with the dinosaurs, they were pioneers. They proved that the skies were conquerable, that vertebrates could rise above gravity's pull and dominate an entirely new dimension of life. Birds and bats came later, but the Sky Lords of Pangea were the first. And for over 150 million years, they soared. From tiny gliders to giants with wingspans rivaling small planes, they ruled horizons across the world. But it all began here, on Pangea, when the first Darren Chapter 9, when forests ruled. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine Pangea not as a barren desert, not as endless rock and sand, but as a living, breathing cathedral of green. Towering conifers rose like skyscrapers, their branches twisting into the skies. Giant ferns unfurled like living umbrellas, shading the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. Strange horsetails, as tall as houses, clustered near swamps and rivers. This was not the familiar rainforest of today. No flowering plants, no buzzing bees, no carpets of bright flowers. Instead, this was a world of ancient forests, dominated by trees and plants that seemed alien compared to what we know now. And yet, these forests weren't just a backdrop. They were the true rulers of Pangea. The animals may grab our imagination, the dinosaurs, the predators, the flying lords of the sky, but without the forests, none of them could have survived. These towering ecosystems controlled the rhythm of life. They dictated where rain fell, where rivers flowed, where herbivores could graze, and where predators would hunt. They weren't silent, they were powerful forces that shaped the destiny of entire species. Pangea's forests were unlike anything we see today. Picture vast stretches of araucaria trees, ancestors of today's monkey puzzle trees, rising into the clouds. Their bark was thick and scaly, their needles stiff and spiky. Beneath them grew dense mats of ferns and cycads, with their strange palm-like trunks and stiff fronds. Cycads especially were everywhere, forming living forests within forests. These plants thrived in Pangea's warm, sometimes dry climate, storing water in their thick trunks and growing slowly over centuries. For the animals of Pangea, the forests were both sanctuary and battlefield. Imagine a herd of Plateosaurus early, long-necked plant-eaters, wandering through a conifer grove. Their long necks stretched upward to pluck soft shoots from the tops of trees. Every step they took left behind broken branches, crushed ferns, and a trail of droppings that fertilized the soil. Where they fed, new plants grew. They were not just consumers, they were gardeners, shaping the forest with their appetites. But where herbivores gathered, predators followed. Forests gave cover to sleek hunters like Coelophysis, small but agile theropods with sharp teeth and a pack-hunting instinct. They would dart between tree trunks, their mottled hides blending into the dappled light. A moment of inattention from a young Plateosaurus, and the forest would erupt in a deadly ambush. In this way, the forests were arena stages where survival played out in shadow and silence. Water was the lifeblood of these green kingdoms. Rivers cut across Pangea like arteries, feeding swamps and wetlands where horsetails and giant club mosses thrived. These watery forests teemed with amphibians and fish, but also served as nurseries for dinosaurs and reptiles. Fossil evidence tells us that many early species laid their eggs near riverbanks, where vegetation could provide cover and water kept the soil moist. A nest hidden among reeds might be the difference between a successful hatch and complete destruction. What made these forests truly remarkable was their resilience. Pangea's climate was extreme wet seasons followed by brutal dry spells, sometimes lasting for years. But the forests endured. Many trees had evolved thick bark to survive fires, while others grew deep roots to tap underground water. After droughts or flames, the forests would regenerate, slowly but steadily reclaiming the land. They were survivors in their own right, long before the animals who fed among them docked yet. The forests also had a dark side. Their very abundance created traps. Thick ferns and dense underbrush could hide predators, or worse, bogs that swallowed unwary creatures whole. Fossils have been found of animals preserved in ancient swamps, likely trapped in mud while searching for food or water. To live in the forest was to live with constant risk, every shadow a possible danger, every step a gamble. Still, for all its perils, the forest was the heart of life. Herbivores like prosauropods and early stegosaurs depended on it. Smaller creatures, lizard-like reptiles, early mammals no larger than mice, insect colonies lived entirely in its shade. Even the mighty predators needed the forests, for without prey, they had nothing. The forests were the great equalizer. They provided, they destroyed, and they shaped evolution with every cycle of growth and death. If we could walk through one of these ancient forests today, the first thing we'd notice is the silence. Not the familiar bird calls or buzzing insects of modern jungles, but a heavier, stranger stillness. Instead of bird songs, the occasional croak of a giant amphibian might echo. Instead of bright flowers, cones and spores ruled the undergrowth. Instead of mammals darting between trees, small reptiles and insect swarms filled the air. It would feel alien, almost prehistoric in the truest sense, because it was. But silence did not mean emptiness. These forests were alive in ways we can hardly imagine. Insects worked tirelessly to recycle dead plants. Fungi broke down fallen trees. Small burrowers tilled the soil with their digging. And every time a giant herbivore passed, it spread seeds across miles, ensuring that new forests would rise again. The entire system was balanced, a cycle of growth, destruction, and renewal that pulsed through Pangea's veins. And perhaps most importantly, these forests set the stage for everything that came after. They laid the foundations for later ecosystems, where flowering plants, birds, and mammals would one day flourish. Without the rule of conifers and cycads, without the resilience of ferns and horsetails, Earth's story would have been very different. When we say the forests ruled Pangea, we mean it literally. They were not passive scenery, they were active, powerful forces that dictated the lives of dinosaurs, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals alike. They were the lungs of the supercontinent, breathing life into every corner of its vast landscapes. And as Pangea's climate began to shift, drying, cracking, and reshaping the land, the forests would face their greatest challenge yet. Some would fall, others would endure, but their rule would leave a mark so deep that even today, when we look at the conifers and cycads that still survive, We are looking at living relics of Pangea's green empire, because long before humans, long before flowering plants, long before the dinosaurs we know best, there was a time when forests truly ruled the earth. Chapter 10. The Great Drying. The forests of Pangea may have ruled, but their reign was never guaranteed. Deep within the heart of the supercontinent, something subtle but catastrophic began to stir. At first, it was hardly noticeable. A few shorter rainy seasons, longer stretches of sun, a few rivers shrinking earlier than expected. Life carried on as if nothing had changed. But the earth has a way of shifting in silence before it strikes with fury. What began as whispers in the climate soon erupted into a full transformation: the Great Drying. Imagine standing in the middle of Pangea's interior during its greenest days. Forests stretch endlessly, the air thick with humidity, and the rhythm of life pulsing all around you. Now fast forward just a few million years. The air grows hotter. The rains come later, weaker. Once thick rivers crack into dusty trenches. The towering trees that once touched the sky now fall, their trunks baking in the relentless sun. The lush green fades into hues of brown and gold, until finally, vast deserts begin to sprawl across the heart of the supercontinent. This wasn't just a season, or even a drought. It was a planetary shift that would redefine life itself. Why did it happen? Pangea's size was both its gift and its curse. Being a single, unified landmass stretching across much of Earth's surface meant that its interior sat unimaginably far from the oceans. Moisture carried by winds from the sea rarely reached this deep. And with mountains rising like barriers along its edges, the little water that did come often stopped before it reached the heartlands. In the middle of Pangea, there was nothing but distance, dryness, and heat. The result was the birth of mega-deserts, some of the largest arid zones in Earth's history. These weren't the deserts we picture today, dotted with cacti and shifting dunes. These were oceans of sand, stretching for thousands of miles. They swallowed entire regions, transforming once forested valleys into lifeless wastelands. Fossilized sand dunes discovered in what is now North America and North Africa stand as silent testimony to these ancient deserts. They towered like frozen waves, shaped by winds that howled endlessly across Pangea's interior. Life in these new deserts faced a brutal choice: adapt, migrate, or die. Many plants simply couldn't survive. Without steady rainfall, ferns and horsetails withered. Swamp forests vanished almost overnight. But some plants were born for this new world. Cycads, with their thick trunks that stored water, flourished where others fell. Conifers with needle-like leaves resisted desiccation and spread across the drylands. Slowly, they became the dominant green against the sea of gold. The Great Drying didn't just kill, it crowned new rulers. For animal survival was far more precarious. Herbivores that once relied on lush forests suddenly found themselves trapped in barren plains. Imagine a herd of prosauropods wandering endlessly, their long necks searching for trees that no longer existed. Many species perished in waves of starvation, but others adapted. Some began to favor hardy, drought-resistant plants. Some grew larger stomachs to digest the tough, fibrous conifer needles. Evolution was working overtime, sculpting survivors from the ruins of collapse. And then there were the predators. For them, the Great Drying was both a curse and a blessing. On one hand, prey became scarcer, harder to find, and often weaker. On the other hand, weakened prey made for easier kills. Hunters like Coelophysis learned to thrive in packs, working together to bring down what little food remained. Fossils suggest that during these harsh times, cannibalism even became a reality, young devoured by their own kind in desperate bids to survive. The Great Drying turned predator and prey alike into desperate participants in a cruel new game. But perhaps the most fascinating survivors were the smallest ones. Early mammals, little more than mouse-sized creatures, thrived in burrows, avoiding the searing sun. Reptiles like dicynodonts developed tusks and beaks, allowing them to gnaw at tough roots and bark when other food was gone. Amphibians retreated to the shrinking rivers, clinging to the last oases of water like lifelines. While giants struggled in the open, the small and resourceful endured, setting the stage for their future roles in Earth's story. The great drying wasn't only about land, it reshaped the skies. With fewer forests to release moisture into the air, rainfall patterns shifted drastically. Some coastal regions became wetter as storms concentrated along the edges of Pangea. But the interior became almost unlivable. Temperatures soared during the day, then plummeted at night. This extreme climate forged animals capable of enduring swings that would kill most creatures alive today. And still, amidst all this desolation, life found ways to astonish. Trackways in fossilized dunes show herds migrating across the sands, traveling hundreds of miles in search of water. These were not random wanderings, they were survival marchers, the kind of relentless journeys that test the endurance of entire species. Imagine the sight: silhouettes of long-necked herbivores moving like shadows across a sea of dunes, predators following at a distance, vultures circling overhead. It was brutal, it was unforgiving, and yet it was profoundly alive. The Great Drying also left scars we can still read today. Rock layers tell us of rivers that once flowed but vanished. Sediments reveal periods when entire lakes shrank to salty puddles before disappearing altogether. Even fossil pollen gives us evidence of plants retreating, shifting, and adapting to the new climate. It's as if the Earth itself left us a diary, page by page, of how life responded to catastrophe. And perhaps the most sobering part of this story is that the Great Drying was not a one-time event. It came in waves, cycles of expansion and retreat, where deserts advanced, forests pulled back, and then, sometimes, the rains returned. Life on Pangea was forced into constant adjustment, forever at the mercy of an unstable climate, but these hardships had consequences far beyond survival. They drove innovation. Species that endured became tougher, more versatile, more resourceful. The great age of the dinosaurs, the rise of predators without borders, the flowering of later ecosystems, all of these were shaped in part by the crucible of the Great Drying. In stripping away the weak, it left behind the resilient. In crushing abundance, it carved out niches for the bold. So when we look back at Pangea, we must remember, it wasn't just a land of giants or a stage for predators. It was a world that tested everything living upon it with fire and sand. The Great Drying was not simply a tragedy, it was the forge in which the future of life was hammered into being. And yet, even as deserts spread and forests fell and creatures clung to survival, something else was beginning: tiny signals, hidden in rocks and landscapes, that would whisper of an even greater transformation still to come. Because Pangea, vast and mighty though it was, would not last forever. Its unity was temporary, and the first hints of its coming break were already beginning to stir. Chapter 11: Whispers before the break. The world of Pangea looked eternal. A single colossal landmass stretched across the globe, framed by endless deserts, boundless forests, and coastlines that touched oceans still young in their geography. For over 100 million years, the supercontinent reigned supreme, shaping ecosystems unlike anything that exists today. And yet, while life thrived, cracks were already forming beneath the surface. This chapter is not about the dramatic tearing apart of Pangea. That moment of geologic violence was still millions of years away. Instead, it's about the whispers before the storm. Subtle signs etched in stone, hidden in the chemistry of ancient seas, and preserved in the fossil record, told a quiet but undeniable story. Pangea was destined to break. And while the land itself remained outwardly stable, life could already feel the coming change. A world under tension, the Earth's crust is never truly still. Even when continents appear motionless, immense tectonic forces are constantly at work beneath them. Pangea sat at the center of this restless energy, a vast landmass squeezed by shifting plates. Geologists studying ancient rocks have found evidence of fault lines and rift valleys forming as early as the late Triassic. These were not yet catastrophic tears, but faint scars, like hairline cracks in glass, hinting at what lay ahead. One of the most telling signs comes from places like the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, an enormous region of volcanic rock that today stretches across 4 continents. It's a fossilized footprint of lava flows so immense they covered millions of square kilometers. These eruptions, scientists believe, were tied directly to the forces that eventually ripped Pangea apart. But even before the lava, there were tremors. Stress in the crust triggered small earthquakes, fractures in the bedrock, and the slow, almost imperceptible opening of valleys out to the creatures living on Pangea. These changes must have gone unnoticed. A sauropod grazing on conifers would not have cared about a distant fissure widening a few centimeters each year. But over generations, valleys deepened, lakes formed in sunken basins, and coastlines subtly shifted. To modern scientists, these landscapes are whispers, a quiet warning that the supercontinent's days were numbered. Fossil clues in an uneasy world beyond the rocks themselves. Fossils tell another part of the story. Paleontologists studying Triassic and Jurassic species noticed odd patterns. Animals and plants that once spread across Pangea began to fragment into more regional populations. It was as though invisible barriers had begun to appear. Take the early crocodile-like reptiles known as phytosaurs. For millions of years, they thrived across the entire supercontinent. But by the dawn of the Jurassic, their range shrank, and new groups of crocodiliforms began to dominate in certain regions. Why? Subtle shifts in climate and geography caused by tectonic changes were reshaping habitats long before continents drifted apart. Similarly, plant fossils record the whispers of division. Conifers that once flourished across vast swaths of land began to cluster into more localized environments. Ferns, cycads, and ginkgos, once global in reach, started showing regional adaptations. The forests of the north did not quite match those of the south anymore. As rainfall patterns and temperatures shifted, these changes foreshadowed the isolation that continental breakup would bring. Evolution was already nudging species into new directions, preparing the stage for the biodiversity explosions that would follow the split. Chemical messages from ancient oceans, some of the most haunting whispers before Pangea's breakup, come not from fossils or rocks, but from chemistry locked inside them. Sediments preserved in what were once shallow seas record shifts in carbon and oxygen isotopes, clues that Earth's climate was fluctuating around the late Triassic. Evidence points to rising levels of carbon dioxide, likely linked to early volcanic activity beneath Pangea. This greenhouse pulse warmed the planet, stressing ecosystems and altering rainfall. In some regions, lakes dried up. In others, monsoon-like storms intensified. These uneven patterns further fragmented life, hinting at an Earth no longer unified in balance. The oceans, too, were restless. Shifts in circulation, caused by the sheer size of Pangea, made some waters stagnant and low in oxygen. These dead zones expanded and contracted over time, leaving chemical signatures in the rocks. Marine life, once abundant, suffered mini-crashes long before the final cataclysm. These subtle extinctions, the slow silencing of trilobites, certain ammonites, and early corals were the ocean's whispers of discontent, the first valleys of separation. If you could stand on Pangea 200 million years ago and walk to one of its forming rift valleys, you'd find yourself in a land both alien and eerily familiar. Imagine towering cliffs of red sandstone, rivers carving their way through fresh fractures, and vast inland lakes filling sunken basins. The air might reek of sulfur from volcanic vents. Herds of early dinosaurs and mammal-like reptiles might have gathered at these lakes, drinking from waters that shimmered with minerals leached from newly exposed rock. One famous example is the Newark, basin in what is now eastern North America. These rift valleys were the literal cracks of Pangea, long before the Atlantic Ocean was born. The lush ecosystems they supported became time capsules, preserving an extraordinary fossil record. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, insects all caught in sediments that today whisper of a world on the verge of transformation. A planet holding its breath. It's easy to imagine Pangea as a timeless stage. But by the Jurassic, the supercontinent was restless. Its deserts grew harsher, its forests more isolated, its coasts more fragmented. Life was responding, adapting, shifting. Beneath the ground, magma pushed upward, straining against the crust. The Earth itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. To us, with hindsight, the signs are clear. To the creatures that lived then, these were just subtle changes in their world's slightly drier seasons, slightly stranger migrations, slightly altered forests. But those whispers carried the weight of destiny. They were the opening notes of a symphony that would crescendo in fire, flood, and division. The unheard warnings. In truth, Pangea's breakup was not sudden. It was not a single event, but a process that began quietly, almost imperceptibly. And perhaps that's the most haunting part of the story. The signs were all there, but no creature could have recognized them. The rocks whispered through fractures. The fossils whispered through changing distributions. The oceans whispered through chemical shifts. But only millions of years later, as scientists pieced the puzzle together, did those whispers become clear words. Pangea was doomed to fragment. The whispers before the break remind us of something profound. Change does not always arrive in a roar. Sometimes it arrives as a murmur, a subtle shift in the air, a quiet tremor in the ground. But those whispers can be just as powerful as the loudest explosions of history. And in the case of Pangea, they marked the beginning of the end for the greatest supercontinent the Earth has ever known. Chapter 12: The Lost Worlds Within. When we think of Pangea, the image that usually comes to mind is one of vastness, endless deserts stretching to the horizon, colossal forests of conifers, and coastlines brushing against the Tethys and Panthalassa seas. A world that seemed unified, exposed, and open. But Pangea, for all its scale, also held secrets. Hidden in its folds were strange, isolated ecosystems, small pockets where life thrived in ways the rest of the world could barely imagine. These were the lost worlds within, refuges tucked away in caves. Valleys, rivers, and burrows, invisible to the grand sweep of history, but critical to the survival and evolution of countless species. This chapter takes us deep into those forgotten microcosms, the subterranean worlds where mammal-like reptiles hid from the heat, the isolated valleys that became cradles of evolution, the inland rivers that teemed with crocodile-like giants. These ecosystems remind us that even within a united supercontinent, life found ways to carve out hidden kingdoms, unseen by the dinosaurs that roamed above. Beneath the surface, a subterranean world on the scorched plains of Pangea. Where the sun baked the land until it cracked, survival often meant one thing: escape. Many creatures turned downward, burrowing into the earth to find shelter. Fossil evidence of early synapsids creatures, more closely related to mammals than to reptiles, shows signs that they were skilled diggers. 1. Extraordinary discovery in South Africa revealed the preserved remains of a group of cynodonts, small, furry mammal relatives huddled together in a fossilized burrow. Their bones, still curled as if in sleep, were entombed by a sudden flood. For millions of years, their tiny underground world lay frozen in time. A window into the hidden lives of creatures that rarely stepped into the open. Burrows like these offered not just protection from predators, but a defense against Pangea's extreme climate swings. In the Triassic and Jurassic, temperatures soared during the day and plummeted at night. By retreating underground, small animals could regulate their body heat, conserve moisture, and raise their young in safety. These hidden refuges were worlds unto themselves, shaping the evolutionary path that would eventually lead to mammals. Imagine walking across a dry, empty plain. To your eyes, the land looks barren. But just beneath your feet lies a bustling network of life. Insect colonies, lizard burrows, mammal-like nests, all unseen and unheard. Pangea's deserts were never truly empty, they were layered, with life thriving in places we rarely think to look. Valleys of isolation. Not all of Pangea was open and uniform. The shifting of tectonic plates and the slow carving of rivers created valleys and basins, some so isolated they became miniature islands in the middle of the continent. These valleys, with their own climates and resources, often hosted species found nowhere else. One striking example is the fossil record of the Newark Basin in North America. Here, rift valleys created wetlands, lakes, and forests that supported ecosystems completely different from the arid land around them. Amphibians thrived in these waters. Early dinosaurs stalked the edges of the lakes. Fish swam beneath floating mats of plants, and insects filled the skies in swarms. These valleys acted like laboratories of evolution. Cut off from the larger world, creatures inside them adapted to their unique conditions, sometimes surviving longer than their relatives elsewhere. In essence, they were lost time capsules, places where extinction came more slowly, or where strange evolutionary experiments unfolded. It's humbling to think, even within a landmass as unified as Pangea, isolation still found a way. Life doesn't just fill continents, it fills cracks, corners, and overlooked niches, turning even the smallest valley into a world of its own. Rivers like arteries. If Pangea was a body, then its rivers were arteries, carrying life-giving water across the vast interior. These rivers carved corridors of fertility through the deserts, creating lush ribbons of green where life clustered. Along these waterways, ancient crocodile-like predators lurked, including the massive phytosaurs. With jaws lined with teeth, they waited in ambush for fish, amphibians, or unwary reptiles that came to drink. Entire ecosystems revolved around these river schools of fish, flocks of pterosaurs, herds of early dinosaurs, all drawn by the promise of water. And yet, these rivers were fickle. Seasonal flooding could transform a dry channel into a raging torrent overnight, drowning everything in its path. Fossil beds filled with tangled remains of fish, reptiles, and plants testify to the sudden violence of these floods. In their cycles of life and death, rivers shaped the fate of species, acting as both sanctuary and executioner for creatures living in Pangea's interior. Rivers weren't just sources of water, they were lifelines, hidden highways that connected otherwise barren landscapes. To follow a river was to find life. To lose it was to face death. The lakes of forgotten giants where rivers pooled, lakes formed, and with them came new worlds of abundance. Fossil evidence shows that lakes on Pangea often teemed with enormous amphibians, some stretching up to 6 feet in length. These creatures, distant relatives of today's salamanders, dominated their aquatic kingdoms. But lakes also carried a darker secret. They could turn deadly. In some Pangean basins, layers of sediment reveal periodic mass die-offs of fish and reptiles. Scientists believe these were caused by sudden overturns of water layers, releasing suffocating gases like carbon dioxide into the air. Imagine standing at the edge of a calm, glassy lake, only to see animals collapse one by one as invisible gas rolls silently across the land. To the animals of Pangea, these lakes were both havens and traps, a reminder that hidden worlds could be as dangerous as they were. Life-giving. Caves. The dark kingdoms, even deeper than burrows, lay another lost world. Caves. Though rare in the fossil record, caves must have played a role in sheltering animals from Pangea's extremes. Stalactites and mineral formations from ancient cave systems provide evidence of water flow and climate shifts, whispering of environments that sheltered countless small species. In darkness, evolution could take strange turns. Insects may have lost their eyes, adapting to navigate by touch. Small amphibians might have lingered in permanent shadow, their lives unfolding in silence. Though little fossil evidence survives from these hidden realms, the caves of Pangea remind us that even the dark was alive, life in the shadows when we tell the story of Pangea. We often focus on the giants, the colossal sauropods, the fearsome predators, the towering forests. But the truth is, much of Pangea's richness existed in the shadows in the burrows, the caves, the valleys, and the rivers. These hidden worlds sustained life when the surface grew too harsh. They nurtured species that would one day take over the planet. The mammals that eventually rose after the age of dinosaurs owe their existence to ancestors that survived in burrows and hidden refuges. The diversity of plants that spread after Pangea's breakup was seated in isolated valleys where unique lineages persisted. Even the rhythms of rivers and lakes shaped migrations that carried species across the globe. Pangea's greatest secret is that its story was not only written on its vast plains but also whispered in its smallest corners, the echo of lost worlds today. Scientists can trace these hidden ecosystems only in fragments, a fossilized burrow here, a Rift Valley fossil bed there, a chemical signature in lake sediments. Piece by piece, the picture emerges of a supercontinent that was far more complex than we once believed. The lost worlds within Pangea remind us that history is not just about what is visible. It is also about what is hidden. Beneath the grand stage of dinosaurs and deserts, life found secret ways to endure, adapt, and prepare for a future none of its creatures could imagine. These whispers from beneath and within the burrows, the valleys, the caves tell us a simple truth. Even in the harshest worlds, life finds a way to carve out safe havens. And often, it is in those hidden places, not the open stage, where the most important chapters of evolution are written. Chapter 13. Shadows of extinction. When we talk about extinctions in Earth's history, the mind usually leaps to the big ones. The asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, the volcanic cataclysm of the Permian, the icy grips of ancient ice ages. These are the marquee events, the great wipeouts that reshaped the entire biosphere in a geologic heartbeat. But between these cataclysms lie subtler tragedies, mini-extinctions, quieter shadows that chipped away at life during Pangea's reign. They didn't erase everything at once, but they eroded the edges of diversity. Like waves slowly wearing down a cliff, these overlooked extinctions often spelled doom for smaller, specialized species. And in their absence, new creatures rose to prominence. In the shadows of Pangea's deserts, rivers, and forests, these extinctions plague out not in fireballs or global ice, but in droughts, shifts in oxygen, or subtle climate flips. They were death by 1,000 cuts, shaping life's course as much as the cataclysms we remember, the forgotten casualties. Let's rewind to the Triassic, when Pangea was still young, its ecosystems fragile. The Permian Triassic extinction, the so-called Great Dying, had already wiped out more than 90% of marine life and nearly 70% of life on land. The survivors were pioneers, venturing into a scarred, unstable world. But survival didn't guarantee safety. Take the case of Dicynodonts herbivorous synapsids with tusks and beak-like mouths. They were once abundant across Pangea, grazing the plains like prehistoric cows. But as climates shifted and dinosaurs began to rise, Dicynodonts dwindled. Fossil records show their diversity dropping sharply, not from a single disaster, but from a steady, grinding decline. By the Jurassic, only a few lineages clung on before vanishing entirely. This wasn't the drama of a sudden asteroid strike. It was slower, more insidious ecosystems narrowing, niches disappearing, food webs collapsing in pieces. Creatures like the Dicynodonts became shadows of their former selves, fading into extinction's quiet embrace. Climate's subtle hand. Pangea's climate was not stable. With its vast interior, The supercontinent suffered from extreme swings, droughts that lasted decades, sudden floods, fluctuations in atmospheric oxygen. For smaller, specialized species, these swings could be fatal. In some periods, oxygen levels dipped low enough to stress animals with high energy demands. Amphibians, reliant on moist habitats, withered when droughts drained rivers and lakes. Insects, once enormous in the Carboniferous thanks to oxygen-rich air, shrank in size as those oxygen levels declined. Imagine entire ecosystems unraveling because the air itself became harder to breathe, or because the rains simply didn't come for generations. No asteroid, no volcano, just the relentless hand of climate reshaping life in silence. The rise of the dinosaurs and the gaps extinctions, even the subtle ones, create opportunity. As synapsids faltered and amphibians shrank in number, dinosaurs found space to grow. They were adaptable, mobile, and resilient, traits that let them step into the void left by others. The Triassic-Jurassic boundary offers a prime example. Around 201 million years ago, a wave of extinctions wiped out many large amphibians and early reptiles. The exact trigger may have been volcanic activity in the central Atlantic magmatic province, spewing carbon dioxide and warming the planet. But whatever the cause, the effect was clear. Competitors fell, and dinosaurs surged. From that point onward, dinosaurs didn't just survive, they dominated. Their rule over Pangea was made possible not just by their strengths, but by the shadows cast by countless others who couldn't endure. Oceans of the forgotten, the seas of Pangea, too, bore witness to these quieter extinctions. Marine reptiles like nothosaurs once thrived in the shallow waters of the Tethys Sea, but as sea levels fluctuated and coastlines shifted, many of these early seafaring reptiles vanished. Smaller extinction pulses, thinned-out ammonites spiraled, shelled relatives of squid over and over again, though they always managed a comeback until the very end of the Cretaceous. Reef systems, too, collapsed in cycles, unable to withstand rising acidity or sudden warming. Each collapse erased entire communities of coral, fish, and invertebrates. We often think of oceans as eternal, but Pangea's seas remind us they were just as fragile. Beneath their waves, extinctions came like tides, sometimes sudden, sometimes creeping, but always reshaping life's balance. The domino effect, one of the most striking lessons from these mini extinctions, is how interconnected life was on Pangea. When one species vanished, others followed. Remove a plant, and the herbivores depending on it dwindled. Remove a predator, and prey populations exploded, destabilizing ecosystems. These cascading effects could wipe out entire communities without a single dramatic cause. The fossil record preserves snapshots of this domino effect, entire layers of sediment where certain groups disappear together, leaving behind gaps that echo across time. In a way, Pangea was a giant web stretched too tightly. A single thread breaking could send tremors across the whole supercontinent. Lessons in fragility. Why do these shadows of extinction matter? Because they remind us that survival isn't just about avoiding catastrophe. It's about enduring change, subtle and relentless. Many of Pangea's creatures couldn't, but their losses paved the way for others. Without the fading of the Dicynodonts, mammals might not have evolved as they did. Without the disappearance of giant amphibians, dinosaurs might not have risen. Even the ocean's losses reshaped marine ecosystems into the forms we recognize today. The story of Pangea isn't just about dominance and abundance. It's about fragility, about how life balanced on a knife's edge in a world that looked eternal, but was anything but shadows that still haunt us today. Scientists look at Pangea's shadow extinctions as warnings. Species don't need an asteroid to vanish. Sometimes it's enough for the climate to change slightly, or for oxygen levels to drop, or for habitats to fragment. In our modern world, where species disappear daily without fanfare, Pangea's lessons feel eerily familiar. The giants of yesterday faded quietly, step by step, Until one day they were simply gone. Extinction doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it comes with a whisper. And in the age of Pangea, those whispers were everywhere, shaping the course of evolution in ways we're only just beginning to understand. Chapter 14. Dreams of Reconnection. For all its vastness and power, Pangea was not eternal. Around 175 million years ago, it began to split apart, its colossal seams pulled open by the restless movement of Earth's tectonic plates. What followed was the slow birth of the continents we recognize today: Africa, Europe, the Americas, Asia, Australia, Antarctica. But here's the part that feels almost poetic. Pangea's story may not be finished. Earth's crust is still on the move, drifting at the speed of your fingernails growing. It may seem glacial to us, but across millions of years, those slow motions add up. And some scientists believe the continents are destined to reconnect, forming a new supercontinent in the far future, Pangea Ultima. It wouldn't be a simple rerun of the past. The Earth of that distant tomorrow would look alien to us. But in the shifting of plates, in the whisper of fault lines, lies the dream of reconnection. The supercontinent cycle. To understand why Pangea might return in some form, we need to look at Earth's deep rhythms. Geologists call it the supercontinent cycle. Roughly every 400 to 600 million years, the continents converge into one massive landmass, only to split again. Before Pangea, there was Rodinia. Before Rodinia, there was Nuna, or Columbia. Even earlier, there may have been Yor. The names are unfamiliar, but the pattern is clear. Continents are wanderers, and their paths inevitably cross. Seen this way, Pangea wasn't a unique event. It was just one verse in Earth's long repeating song. And if the pattern holds, another supercontinent is not only possible but inevitable. The birth of Pangea Ultima. What might that future supercontinent look like? One hypothesis paints a striking picture. Over the next 200 to 250 million years, the Atlantic Ocean will stop widening and begin to close. The Americas will drift back toward Africa and Europe. The Mediterranean will vanish, crumpled into mountains like the Himalayas. Eventually, the continents may slam together, creating a new landmass centered near the equator. Geologists have given this imagined world a name: Pangea Ultima, the ultimate Pangea. Picture it, an immense, sprawling continent stretching across Earth, ringed by a superocean. Deserts would dominate its heart, just as they did in the original Pangea, while lush coastlines hugged the edges. Mountain chains taller than anything we know today could rise where continents collide. The climates would be extreme, scorching interiors, monsoon-soaked coasts. Polar regions locked in ice. To stand in such a world would be to witness a new chapter of Earth's epic cycle, one both familiar and alien. Other futures: Novo Pangea, Aurica, Amasia. But Pangea Ultima isn't the only dream geologists entertain. Depending on how plate tectonics plays out, there are multiple scenarios. Novo Pangea: if the Atlantic keeps widening while the Pacific closes, the Americas could eventually collide with Asia. Australia might join in, forming a massive landmass stretching across much of the southern hemisphere. Aurica. In another vision, the continents all gather around the equator, forming a belt-like supercontinent encircled by ocean. ASIA. Some models predict the continents will cluster around the North Pole, creating a landmass centered in the Arctic. Each version offers a different blueprint for Earth's distant destiny, a different dream of reconnection. No one knows which path the continents will take, but the possibilities remind us that Earth is not fixed. It is alive, in motion, writing futures as dramatic as its past. Life on a future supercontinent. If life still thrives when the next supercontinent forms, what would it face? The challenges would be immense. The vast interiors of supercontinents tend to be arid, stripped of rainfall. Only along coasts and rivers would lush habitats persist. Migratory animals might face brutal distances to find food or water. And with continents colliding, volcanic activity could surge, altering climates again and again. But just as in the age of Pangea, these harsh conditions could also spark new evolutionary bursts. Isolation within valleys, adaptation to deserts, and competition on coastlines could drive the rise of species we can hardly imagine. In Pangea's lost worlds, mammals quietly evolved in burrows while dinosaurs thundered overhead. In Pangea Ultima, perhaps entirely new lineages will wait in the shadows, ready to inherit the Earth. The human perspective, of course. The timescale here stretches far beyond humanity's likely lifespan. 200 million years from now, our species may be long gone or transformed into something unrecognizable. Yet imagining Pangea Ultima sparks something deep within us. It's a reminder of our planet's restless nature, of how fragile the arrangement of continents we take for granted really is. We often think of the world map as permanent. But it isn't. Africa once brushed against South America. India once floated alone before crashing into Asia. Antarctica was once green. The face of Earth is always shifting, always rewriting itself. Pangea Ultima is just the next draft in a story that never ends. Dreams and warnings. There's something strangely poetic about the idea of Pangea returning. It feels like a circle closing, a reunion of lands long separated. But these dreams also carry warnings. Supercontinents are often linked to environmental instability, drought, climate swings, even mass extinctions. If humanity's descendants are still here when Pangea Ultima forms, they'll inherit a world both unified and perilous. In the end, the concept of a future supercontinent is less about prediction and more about perspective. It reminds us that Earth is in constant flux, that our continents are not eternal borders, but drifting pieces of a grand puzzle. And whether or not we are here to see it, the Earth will continue its dance, pulling itself together only to tear apart again. The eternal cycle of connection. So when we dream of Pangea Ultima, we're not just imagining a new landmass. We're touching on something profound, the cyclical heartbeat of the planet itself. Every mountain range, every desert, every ocean is part of a rhythm that spans billions of years. We are simply passengers on one verse of that song. Pangea's story didn't end when it broke apart. It continues in every shifting plate, every drifting continent, every tremor deep beneath our feet. And someday, far beyond our time, the world may reunite in one colossal embrace, a new Pangea rising from the oceans, carrying life into yet another chapter of Earth's epic. Chapter 15. Earth's Eternal Cycle. The story of Pangea is not just the story of a vanished continent. It is the story of Earth itself, of a planet that has never stood still, of continents that have danced across oceans, colliding, breaking, and reuniting over billions of years. To understand Pangea's legacy, we must step back and realize Pangea was not the first supercontinent, and it will not be the last. The Earth's crust is alive. Beneath our feet, massive slabs of rock, the tectonic plates, float on a restless sea of molten mantle. They grind, shift, and crash into one another, slowly but relentlessly. Over millions of years, these movements reshape the face of the planet. Oceans vanish. Mountains rise. Deserts spread. And every few 100 million years, something incredible happens. The land gathers together into one colossal mass, a supercontinent. Long before Pangea, there were others. The first we know of was called Valbara, over 3 billion years ago. It was small compared to later giants, but it set the stage. After Valbara came Ur, Kenneland, Columbia, Rodinia, and Pannotia, vast landmasses that came together, broke apart, and then gave birth to new oceans and new worlds. Each time, life was reshaped. New species rose. Old ones perished. Evolution itself seemed to accelerate during these transitions. And then came Pangea, around 335 million years ago. bigger than any that came before. It stretched nearly from pole to pole, ringed by a single mighty ocean, Pangea. Within its vast interior were deserts so dry they mirrored seas of sand, forests that towered like cathedrals, and animals that grew to sizes almost unimaginable. Dinosaurs walked across its plains without ever meeting a true border. Predators roamed freely, their reign unchallenged by oceans, but as we've seen, even Pangea was doomed to fracture. Around 175 million years ago, it began to break apart, birthing the continents we know today. From that break came familiar coastlines, familiar oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian. The continents drifted into the forms we recognize on our maps. Yet here is the stunning truth. This drifting is not random. It is part of a cycle. The same forces that tore Pangea apart are still working today. Slowly, steadily, the continents continue to move. And in the far future, perhaps 200 to 300 million years from now, they will come together again. A new supercontinent will rise. Scientists already have names for it. Some call it Pangea Ultima, a vision where the Atlantic closes, the Americas crash back into Africa and Europe, and the Pacific becomes the last great ocean. Others imagine a Messiah, where Asia and the Americas fuse near the North Pole. Still others propose Novo Pangea, or even Aurica, each a different possible configuration of the same eternal cycle. Think about that. One day, the world may once again have no separate continents, only a single massive land wrapped by a single massive sea. A new age of deserts, forests, predators, and survivors will begin. But what will live there? When Pangea first formed, mammals were nothing more than small, scurrying creatures, hiding in the shadows of reptilian giants. Dinosaurs would go on to dominate. When the next supercontinent rises, humanity may no longer be here. Perhaps another branch of life descended from birds, reptiles, or even something we cannot yet imagine will inherit that stage. Just as we gaze back at Pangea with awe, perhaps future beings will look back at our world, the broken continents, the cities, the oceans, and see it as only one chapter in the Earth's great story. And that is the beauty of it. The Earth itself is the storyteller. Continents merge, break, and merge again. Life struggles, adapts, and thrives. Extinction and creation walk hand in hand. Pangea may be gone, but its memory is written everywhere, in the fossils beneath our feet, in the mountains that were once coastal cliffs, in the deserts that were once seas. Even now, as you look at a globe, you can trace the scars of that ancient giant. The coast of South America fits almost perfectly into Africa's. The Appalachian Mountains of North America and the Scottish Highlands of Europe are part of the same ancient chain. These echoes are not accidents. They are whispers of Pangea, reminders of the unity that once was. And so, the legacy of Pangea is not simply its existence, but its promise that Earth is never finished, never static. What seems permanent today, the Atlantic Ocean, the continents we recognize, the boundaries of nations, are fleeting in the scale of geological time. Our maps are temporary sketches. The planet is always drawing a new one. Imagine standing on the shore of a future supercontinent, hundreds of millions of years from now. Perhaps towering reptiles will once again rule. Perhaps forests, unlike any we've ever seen, will stretch to the horizon. Perhaps new oceans, new winds, and new stars above will shape a world both alien and familiar. It is a humbling thought that even the mightiest mountains we know, even the deepest seas, are temporary parts of this eternal cycle. The story of Pangea, then, is not an ending. It is a reminder that we are part of something vast in Earth that is alive, always moving, always changing. From the first supercontinent to the last, from the first spark of life to whatever strange forms may come after us. The cycle continues. And so, as our journey through Pangea closes, we end not with a period, but with a circle. Because Earth itself writes in cycles. Pangea was one verse in an endless song, one heartbeat in a timeless rhythm. The land may shift, the creatures may change, but the story never ends. The story of Pangea is the story of Earth's eternal cycle.